this astaxanthin supplement, I hear it's 6,000 times stronger than vitamin C, 100 times stronger than vitamin E, and 800 times stronger than CoQ10?
Yes, astaxanthin supports joint health, memory health, even anti-aging and immune health. This Hawaii brand delivers 3 times more nature-identical astaxanthin to your body and is a better buy than the competition. It's called Xanthicin. Safely manage your inflammatory health with Xanthicin. It's pure and highly absorbed, providing greater benefits. Visit getxantho.com and these retailers.
All right, how's it going, everybody? Episode 20. We've made it to the 20th episode of Hawaii Football Now, presented by Xanthicin. A big mahalo also to our sponsor, Spectrum Mobile. Jordan Helle, Hunter Hughes, back with you. It has been a fun journey, Hunter. It has been one full of drama when it comes to following and covering the University of Hawaii football team. I'd like to think we're more sort of followers and commentators as it goes throughout and sharing some of our reactions, some good, some bad. There is a whole lot to get to. Every time we think, hey, what are we going to do in the offseason? What are we going to talk about once the season is over? You know, we can get a little more creative. It is just the season that keeps on giving, and there is a whole lot to talk about because, as we mentioned, the drama continues, and we will get into last Friday's Senate informational briefing, I believe it was technically called, where a whole lot came out in that, and quite honestly, it may take us quite a bit to wade through that as well. But before we dive into the Senate hearing and start, kind of trying to sift through all of that, I figured we kind of start on a positive note. It's opening drive. We like to keep this light. And Hunter, we had a couple of commits, and I think that's positive for the University of Hawaii. You had a linebacker in Demarii Blanks, junior college transfer, who was, I believe, all conference in his conference from the College of San Mateo, 5'11", 193. Yep. You see those numbers, you see his production, you think, hey, maybe a guy that can step in with the departure of Darius Muasau. Dude who had 3 offers, University of Hawaii. This is per 24/7 Sports and Demarii Blanks' Twitter account from the University of Hawaii, Division II Davenport and NAIA Midland University. And then you have a quarterback coming in. And so you figure, hey, maybe a guy who can compete now that Chevin Cordero has departed the program as well. Cammon Cooper. Cam Cooper's a grad transfer from Washington State, was down on the depth chart. Basically threw less than 30 passes throughout his Cougar career. He's a former 4-star recruit, though, originally from Lehigh, Utah. So some excitement there. You also have some destinations announced for some of the outgoing guys, Jonah Laulu to Oklahoma and Nick Marner to Cincinnati. Not bad, to say the least, for a couple of high-profile guys who leave via the transfer portal. But Hunter, some of your reaction to the latest moves personnel-wise, especially those guys coming in.
Yeah, we touched on this a couple episodes ago, that I think that where the transfer portal might be seen as a detriment to some programs, other programs like ours, where it seems like with the Todd Graham era, it's very much whoever the next man up is, what we're going to use them. And we really don't have a choice right now, too, with regards to recruiting and what has gone down for us with the transfer portal. So many people have, in a sense, moved their talents elsewhere. It's at least encouraging so far to see them land some pretty prolific guys, at least coming from some Power 5 programs. I know this now marks at least a second, maybe even the third transfer from the Pac-12. Anytime you can get somebody from that tier of football coming down to UH, it's just maybe half a step slower than up there. And guys that play and do well up there usually have a good time coming down and playing for us. So it speaks to this coaching staff's ability to recruit, build relationships with guys. As much as, and we'll touch on this a little while, this coaching staff has had somewhat of controversial ways of interacting with their players at times. I mean, they're able to recruit well. And we have always said about Todd Graham, the pedigree and history from this guy. He seems to know just about everybody connected with college football. And I don't know, that's always encouraging when your head coach can pull guys, especially like quarterbacks, from the Power 5 down to the Mountain West level.
Yeah, and to your point, look, the transfer portal exists. It isn't going away anytime soon. And so you have to, right? You have to be able to pull guys in, even though you're going to lose some talent like a Jonah Laulu to Oklahoma, like a Nick Marner to Cincinnati, like Darius Muasau to UCLA. I mean, these are Power 5 guys, and also speaks to the talent that has been on this team the last couple of years. But if you're going to lose those guys, it has to be a two-way street, right? To survive in big time college football these days, to survive as a Division I program, you have to make sure you also pull guys in via the portal. And, guys like Cam Cooper maybe turn out to be someone pretty productive for this program, and likely could compete with Braden Shager for that starting quarterback job if indeed AJ Bianco signs as a true freshman out of St. Louis school. He, I would imagine, is probably in that mix as well. So some things to get excited about, no doubt. All right. We're going to take a lot of time talking about this hearing. I'm honestly not sure, if we'll have enough time to discuss it all in this week's episode. This may have to be a multi-parter, the off-season chronicles for Hawaii football now here with Hunter and I. A quick reminder, we touched on this a little bit last week, right? The two agenda items, quote, budget and cost related to coaching staff contracts, and, quote, issues relating to the transfer of players. That was according to an announcement from the Senate Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Higher Education Committees. It was a joint informational briefing amongst the two different committees. I bring that up because what was on the agenda, that comes up many a time throughout the hearing, and some confusion there. But before we get into some of the details, Hunter, and we kind of wade through the mud, if you will, of that 2-hour marathon that had all kinds of twists and turns and was better than scripted television, I think.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the Senate holding this informational briefing at all? You had calls of overreach, calls for the legislature to accept more blame, to be more supportive, to provide more funding, etc. Many of those sentiments also brought up in written testimony, official written testimony, and not just sort of around the water cooler and on social media or what have you. But what were your thoughts of just having this thing at all?
I see it as a positive thing, rather than it just being this hot pot for negativity on social media or something like that. Oh, great. Now we've got this Senate hearing too. What else could go wrong for our program? No, I see it as people are finally paying attention. The voices of players, alumni, coaches, people connected to our program, and the sort of struggles that we've experienced of what it really is to try to build this program that is University of Hawaii. Some of these things are being taken note of and taken seriously. And then also, some of the stuff with the transfer portal, you see somewhat of a care for the people that are still connected to the program now. And if there are major changes that need to be made, at least we're having these discussions. A lot of times players, personnel connected to the team are kind of the unsung heroes in a way. Like, we see them on the field, but we don't always get to their voices aren't always heard or appreciated. So that, for me, Jordan, as a former player, I get most excited about something like that, because it shows that we care enough as a local culture to not let some of these things go by. And as we know, we've talked about it in previous episodes, as we continue to dream up what University of Hawaii football could be in the future, there's other things that make up this equation, rather than maybe a coach that doesn't necessarily fit us or something like that. It's a much bigger issue here, talking about facilities, talking about infrastructure, the organization of our program in general, that all goes into putting a winning product on the field. All of those things need to be figured out and addressed. So the fact that local government in a sense is starting to have conversations like that, I think is a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And look, it was messy. It was a little one-sided. All those things can be true, but you got to find a way to make something positive out of it, right? And at least these conversations are happening. There was clearly smoke. There clearly still is smoke around the program. and to find out exactly where this program is heading, what steps are being taken, because it is more than just little murmurs here and there. I mean, there are full-blown accusations being thrown out there, whether via written articles, whether via players speaking out, whether anonymous statements, all those kinds of things. And so something had to happen, I think, whether it was, as some would say, it should have been in the hands of the Board of Regents, whether it should have been handled in-house by Athletic Director David Matlin, President David Lassner, or whether or not the Senate should be involved, the state legislature. Okay, I think that's a fair conversation to have, where that arena is appropriate, but conversations need to be had. And so wherever it takes place, hopefully something positive comes out about that. And if you do have legislators who are coming to the table, maybe too late, right? A lot of people bring up Aloha State, all those kinds of things. Like sure, we can rehash and go play by play as to all of the problems that happened to the program and happened within the program. Fair. But to your point, I think I would wholeheartedly agree. Like, at least some of those conversations are happening. I don't know how many of those had happened in the last several years, right? When it comes to budget, when it comes to direction of the program, when it comes to support, all those things matter. And so I'm with you. Maybe not the perfect setting, maybe not the perfect way to set up the hearing, but at least it happened. And hopefully through some of the ashes, we can see some growth throughout that. And so what we kind of wanted to do, and I'm going to do a lot of reading in this episode, because I don't know how many people took the time to listen through 2 hours of this hearing. I don't know how many people took the time to read through 86 pages of written testimony. And so at risk of sort of misrepresenting what people said, or misrepresenting what people wrote, we're going to try and take people in context as best as we can as we sort of break through this thing. And the hearing kind of took place in several parts. You had some conversations initially between the senators and President David Lassner, who appeared in person in the meeting room there at the state capitol. David Matlin, who joined via Zoom, who had some Zoom issues. And it was just sort of a comedy of errors at the beginning. And I'm not saying it was AD Matlin's fault or anything like that. Technology is technology. We've all been there. But it was just like, it was one of those, like, come on, man. The one time his Zoom goes bad is this. And again, I don't think it was his fault at all, but it was just like, man, it was just sort of appropriate for everything that's gone on. It's like something always seems amiss, whether it's kismet or not. But just some of the quotes out of that first half an hour or so of discussion, David Lassner opened with some comments, and he said he wants I think he was asked about the goals. He was asked by Senator Dela Cruz. Donovan Dela Cruz is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. What the goals are, what the vision is for the football program, for the athletic department as a whole. And he said, hey, I want a competitive Division I program that competes for a conference championship each and every year. And then a follow-up question about the entire athletic department. He said, brings pride to the state, educates our student athletes, that keeps them safe, educates them in ways that complements their academic education and well. It seemed like clear-cut objective vision goals. Higher Education Committee Chair Donna Mercado Kim, Senator Mercado Kim brought up the fact about UH's lump sum budget, and basically to reiterate the fact that in a lot of ways, the legislature funds the athletic department and the University of Hawaii through lump sum budgets. It's general fund money. And David Lassner confirmed that, the president and the university decides what to do with the general fund allotment, while also acknowledging that the athletic department budget comes from a variety of different sources, right? Revenue produced via TV contracts, revenue produced via ticket sales, sponsorships, naming rights and things like that, as well as donations, right? So the athletic department is a little different from your typical state agency. It's not the same as, say, the Department of Education, or say, the Department of Transportation or something like that. There are very different sources that end up funding the budget. But for the most part, the point there was that the university and the athletic department has a fair amount of autonomy in how they spend that money, which was, I think, an important point to make. Then you had some awkwardness regarding questions about the budget. UH officials said they weren't really prepared to discuss the budget. That wasn't clear via the agenda that they were given or how they interpreted the agenda. Even though, again, as we read earlier, budget was one of the words in the agenda, or at least the press release that was put out by the committees. Senator De La Cruz brought up the fact that football generates revenue to help fund the rest of the department. If football fails, quote, to generate revenue, then that is troubling. We need football to be competitive to generate revenue to pay for other programs. And at what point does the president's office or the board of regents step in to make sure the program is fiscally sound? After they sort of figured out the Zoom issue, Lassner and Matlin then addressed sort of the elephant in the room, which was the negative accusations, which were some of the social media firestorm that has come up in the last month or so. And President Lassner saying that many of the matters brought up in social media are not typically matters we handle in public. The fact that details are not made public does not mean that things are not being addressed. David Matlin, reading from an initial prepared statement, at least that's the way it seemed in watching the hearing, said, I acknowledge that there are issues with the program. We have heard complaints from players and parents. I am committed to addressing all the concerns moving forward. Please know that any issues and problems with the UH athletic program are 100% my responsibility. The buck does stop with me. Proud of our he mentioned he was proud of the student athletes, how UH responded to the closure of Aloha Stadium, proud of the men's volleyball national championship. And then he went on to say, I believe people can change and be better. And sort of echoing what Lassner said just moments prior, an absence of news and any public pronouncement does not mean an absence of action. And he closed by saying the buck stops here. And so after that, they start taking testimony. So I figure that's probably a good place to stop, Hunter, and react a little bit. And just kind of curious what your reactions were to some of those initial statements, including some of the comments by President Lassner, Athletic Director Matlin, in talking about, hey, they acknowledge there are issues, right? To what extent, I don't know if they really got into that detail. They acknowledge that they are taking steps to address some of that issue. And particularly in the case of Athletic Director Matlin, accepting a lot of that responsibility that, hey, it is on him, the athletic department, to fix what needs to be fixed. Again, a little vague as to exactly what needs to be fixed at this point, but your thoughts on kind of those initial statements put out by the university leadership.
Yeah, those of us that have been around the program know that yes, just because something isn't being addressed publicly doesn't mean there's not necessarily action. You and I have talked about how Matlin held a closed door meeting with player leaders, things like that from the football program, just maybe like 3 weeks ago, just before the right before the Hawaii Bowl, to kind of get some things ironed out. However, in this world of social media, public relations and PR is so important, and you can't just cop out and say that we're not talking about these things, but we assure you action is required, especially in a place like Hawaii where everything is so small, so intimate. We need to hear from you, or at least see, there are things taking place here. We're not saying big action, just something, because when we don't hear anything, we wonder if you heard us and if you care. So like those two things are very real questions. They were on my mind. I can only imagine they were on other alumni, season ticket holders, boosters, NACOA members, all of the things that help build our program and make it competitive on the field. All of those things are important. So that I understand where he's coming from, but multiple national sports articles, news reports have come out about the state of University of Hawaii football. We need a little bit more than that. We assure you things are getting done. It just doesn't weigh quite as heavy as what we've experienced this last month. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with you. I think in the nature of things, especially now, not necessarily just in relation to the University of Hawaii, but optics, right? Optics, public relations. I think you use that term. Like, it matters. It really does. And then you compound that with, as you point out, Hawaii is such a tight-knit community, right? And and to not say anything. And I get it. They've put out some statements. They've released some things. And so it's not been absent completely, but I don't think it's been enough, because you bring up a litany of reasons to be more public, to be more outward facing when it comes to this. And I get it. You're talking about privacy issues. You're talking about rights of individual players, coaches, and things like that when it comes to personnel, when it comes to legal things. Okay.
In a lot of ways, hearsay too, like trying to get down to the bottom of it.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean you can't hold a press conference or multiple press conferences, or that doesn't mean you can't speak out publicly, right? And say what you can, because as you point out, an absence of more just leads to more speculation, more fodder outside for the detractors, for more of that negative space, warranted or not. And that affects so many things. It affects donations, right? Fundraising. That's huge, right? You need to be as transparent as you possibly can. And I get it. You can't be fully transparent for a multitude of reasons, a lot of those legal. But you need to be as outward facing as possible for donations, for fundraising. It's hard to fundraise when there's a lot of doubt around the program. For recruiting, right? For recruiting players to come into the program. And I get it. They're getting some guys, no doubt. Todd Graham has been able to build some of those relationships, but you can't tell me it's good for recruiting, right? Especially local kids, especially some of these Hawaii high school kids. That can't help. And then on top of that, probably most importantly, is within the building, and just showing, you can tell guys privately that, hey, we're going to help address this. We're going to handle some things. We're going to address the issues, but also projecting that outwardly and reassuring folks within the building, right? Because folks within the building have some doubt if that's the case, if a lot of these things are true. And so being able to go out and being able to project that outwardly and also kind of holds you accountable as well, right? I'm not saying these guys aren't accountable, but it also at least puts it out there like, hey, we're going to get this done. We're going to take some steps. We're going to acknowledge problems within the locker room. Like some of that was sort of acknowledged prior, but I don't know how outwardly, right? I don't know how explicitly. And so I'm not saying that they aren't doing things inside of the building. Now, I'm not saying they're not trying their earnest, but I think it would help a lot to be a little more public about it. And I'm not saying you got to give full details, but just the effort shown, I think, would go a long way in terms of mending things, building bridges once again. Like I just think, and to their credit, they admitted that things could have been handled better, and they take some responsibility there. But I also don't think it's too late to be a little more public about things and how we go about advancing forward, because as we go throughout this, I mean, it's very clear that they are in support of Todd Graham remaining the football coach there. And so if that's the case, right, you got to go ahead and take steps forward as opposed to working to get him out and wallowing in that. Like that's just the fact of the matter, right? However you feel about the guy, however you want the program to proceed going forward, like he is the guy.
Yeah.
Unless something else comes out. But as of last week, Friday, like Todd Graham is the guy. And so I think things have to change in terms of public relations, in terms of optics, in terms of how they reach out and connect with the community, with just the public at large when it comes to dealing with a lot of the turmoil that's happening within the building.
Yeah, totally. And my dad used to always say perception is everything. And it doesn't mean that it's an exact replication of what is going on, or it's important to care about how you are perceived, how you are being portrayed in the public light. And with everything that has gone on this year, from COVID to fans to nationally televised games and not putting a great product out there on the field, from the a mainland perspective, Hawaii football, other than miraculously making it into a bowl game, hasn't been much of a thought. But for the rest of us here locally, Hawaii football is a big deal, and you can point the blame here, you can point the blame there. I know a lot of that is going on social media. A little bit of perceived action and fire behind your action, even if big decisions aren't being made, just little hustle, a little care, a little attention for, the big powers that be, the president of our university, the athletic director, and then obviously our head football coach, that there needs to be a perception that, okay, these guys are working hard to right the ship. So that's what I would say is the most important thing here, Jordan.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And so following that, to the surprise of many, including President Lassner and AD Matlin, they took oral testimony. They were the athletic or the UH administration said they were told there would be no oral testimony, and then we got like an hour of it, and it was largely one-sided, and we will get into some of the comments from UH administration to that here in just a second. But I did want to bring up some of that was shared. You had folks like RJ Hollis, who shared first, shared some of his experiences with the program, not being allowed to attend practice, basically. You had former players such as Leonard Lee, who spoke on the record, use words to describe Todd Graham as a tyrant, called him hands down the worst guy I've ever met in my life. He said Todd Graham likes to disguise the way he treats us as discipline, and he can't repeat what language was used because it's too vulgar, is what Leonard said. Leonard Lee, a Kapolei graduate, went to Pima Community College in Arizona and then transferred back home, no longer on the team. Says he was not really informed by the coaching staff when he was kicked off of the team following the end of the regular season prior to bowl practices, basically starting that week. He was asked by Senator De La Cruz if walk-ons were treated differently than scholarship players. He basically said yes, and described what I think many would call microaggressions to some players on the team. Brought up only guys dressing out for the game could take part in the rock walk, whether that was COVID related or whatnot. So those are some of the pre-game traditions that Todd Graham has brought in. You had Derek Thomas, also former player who spoke on the record, a guy who came in, played quite a bit under the previous coaching staff, didn't play all that much, defensive lineman, hard worker, mainland guy. And he shared that athletic director Matlin met with the team shortly after Nick Rolovich took the Washington State job. And he shared that there were two main requests from the team, at least two overarching requests among others, when asked by Matlin, what they wanted to see in their next head coach. And he said someone with ties to Hawaii. And the second one was a personable person, someone who players could relate to. And then Derek Thomas went on to say that Matlin hired the exact opposite of that. He also did mention that, one thing he admired about Todd Graham initially, his passion for sharing the gospel word of Christ. Derek Thomas self-described as a Christian. He appreciated having chapel on Friday nights, that Coach Graham would preach about religion. And then it took kind of a turn because Derek Thomas then said that Todd Graham was almost none of those things. He called him a hypocrite, said at his first meeting that he wasn't going to change much about the program, but everything has changed, stripped the team of its culture, him boasting about money and his house, not godly nor professional, is what Derek Thomas said. Said he likes to use confirmation bias. He has a predetermined idea of who you were as a person. People rejected opportunities to play because about how he felt about you as a person, paraphrasing a little bit there from Derek Thomas. That was some of the testimony. We had heard some of the things from Leonard Lee, say on Twitter and whatnot, but hearing that from Derek Thomas for me was one of the more surprising things that I heard throughout the oral testimony. And we'll try not to belabor some of these points too much. You heard from Justin Awahinui, who's felt a huge disconnect between he and the coaching staff. His position coach is another guy who claims that he was not directly informed when he was dismissed from the team. You heard from Mililani head football coach Rod York, who is also a UH alum, played at the University of Hawaii, Iolani grad, talking about his experience with the program. He felt compelled to talk because he talks to a number of his former players who come through that program. Mililani has been a great pipeline for the University of Hawaii. Darius Muasau. You got a couple of linemen on the team, guys like KK Padella who have come through. Asher Palanca is a young defensive back on that team as well. And he basically said, he's supported the program because he has trusted the head coach. He is not sure that is no longer the case, but he did acknowledge that he's only getting one side of the story from his players. He said there are always two sides to every story. He has not spoken to Todd Graham. He said he has texted here and there. He has had one conversation in person with Coach Graham, and he said, "Hey, I like the Coach Graham that I know, but he's hearing a much different story from his players." And Rod York brought up, "Hey, that players sell the program, right?" And it seems like there's less unity in the program. You had the parents of Michael Elatise speak. He's the Kaiser graduate, former All-American high school offensive guard, played at the University of Arizona, then transferred home to the University of Hawaii. And they brought up his struggles with post-concussion syndrome, his struggles with mental health. They claimed that requests for help were not really met. They talked about his position coach, Bennett, helped them speak with Coach Graham, but nothing ever really came of it. He said they spoke that Todd Graham was always very nice, always very supportive of Michael, but no action ever came of it. After he was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome, they went to Coach Graham with that diagnosis, treatment, asking for help. Basically said they got a lot of promises from Coach Graham, but nothing ever really came of it. And maybe speaks to a larger issue within the UH athletic department as well. That was another bit of testimony that kind of hit me a little bit harder, Hunter, and we'll get you here in just a second, because I did kind of want to go through this all at once. You heard from Daryl McBride, who's also been a very prominent alum who has spoken up, trying to help offer support for this program, basically asking for transparency from the program. He said, hey, he's got nothing against Todd Graham or David Matlin, but he has tried to put in calls to both, has not received. He said he is part of an alumni group that just wants to help. The Twitter space that he and RJ Hollis started and kind of got this whole ball rolling in terms of the public outcry. He said it wasn't created to bash the program. He said he's been blocked by several UH assistant coaches on Twitter, social media, man. He sent an email from Solomon Montaltia, another alum, Campbell graduate, to David Matlin in August, bringing up some of the same issues that boiled over in November, December, was not returned. Keep that in mind. That is addressed a little bit later on by athletic director Matlin. You had Tina Thomas, the mother of Derek Thomas, who got into a Twitter or Facebook sort of back and forth with Penny Graham, the wife of Todd Graham. She had screenshots that are included in her written testimony. Penny Graham saying, quote, "Sorry, your son didn't work hard enough," after Tina Thomas had posted some frustration with the program. I guess Derek's sister also went back and forth with Penny Graham. Just messy. She brought up an instance of Derek playing the ukulele for family after the Wyoming game, and then allegedly told by Graham and his position coach Dan Phillips to stop playing because it's, quote, "effing annoying." Phillips told her later, this is according to Tina Thomas, that, you have a good son, but he needs to leave the ukulele at home. Again, just messy stuff. And then she also made the claim that Graham was overheard at the airport calling Hawaii a third world country because the vending machine didn't have Dr. Pepper, which is kind of comical, and it has led to a lot of social media posts of people just posting Dr. Peppers, and it's kind of funny, whatever the level of truth to that is. Again, some of these just kind of make you, put your hand to your forehead with some of these. And again, this is just what was shared in the Senate hearing. And then we heard from Michael Green, the longtime prominent litigation attorney in Hawaii, former sports agent, still, I think, does some work in that. I did not have that on my bingo card for people appearing at this hearing. And he went in a long diatribe talking about the program. He said that everybody should be removed. Todd Graham, David Matlin, David Lassner. He called for everything to basically be torn down. We won't get into the details. It was more emotional, I think, than anything else. Not saying that it wasn't valid. And so those were the folks who spoke publicly, and that went on for about an hour. David Lassner came on and was a little incredulous. I kind of don't blame him if he was told that no testimony was coming down. But he said testimony was, quote, cherry picked. He called the process unbelievable, and also brought up that substantial testimony in support of the athletic director and coach wasn't allowed at the hearing. All right. So I think this is another good breaking point, Hunter, and we can talk about this a little bit before we take our halftime break here. There were 86 pages of written testimony. It was probably about 50-50 in support of the coaching staff, in support of the athletic department versus criticism. But what did you make of the slew of oral testimony, the tone of that testimony, and I guess also the fact that, you know, they clearly only asked the folks who had issues to come and speak, which I don't think at the end of the day is too surprising, but maybe wasn't quite what the athletic director and the president anticipated in all of this. But some of these claims kind of make you laugh. Some of these, quite honestly, make you quite worried and hit me pretty hard when you're talking about some of the, especially the Michael Elatise comments, some of these others as well.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I think about comments from players like that, because we've talked about on this show before that each player's experience with a coaching staff is going to be different. You've got walk-ons, you've got people that are just, you know, biting at the feet to try to stay on the team, similar to my experience. Those type of people's experience with the head coach and the program in general is going to be a little bit different than, say, someone who was an All-American in high school and a transfer from a major Power 5 school. The relationship with the head coach, their attention that they get, sometimes even the preferential treatment with gear, with time with the coach, invites over to the house, that like they're going to be the best experience with the coaching staff. And so to hear from the horse's mouth, essentially from one of those top tier guys, that, you know, sure, he might have listened to them, but it doesn't sound like this guy goes above and beyond for his guys. Let's just keep it right there without going into these offshoot little rabbit holes of he said this, he portrays this way, he's this way in person, stuff with the wife and things like that. All the social media frenzy, let's just set that on the side for a moment. It shows someone who is not necessarily Hawaii through and through. Not only doesn't have ties to us, but, you know, we listen to each other out here in Hawaii. We try to help each other out. It's the Aloha State. If you're going to be the head football coach at University of Hawaii, you gotta live and breathe aloha, or people are gonna sniff it out, because it's so countercultural to how things work over here. And so, especially with a local kid born and raised, if he's not, you know, his needs aren't necessarily being met, especially a top tier athlete like he is, that's particularly alarming for me, and just shows that this guy doesn't really know how we go about our day-to-day business in our lives over here. I appreciated some of the comments from Thomas as well. He's clearly a bright kid, someone that is well-spoken, well-versed, was able to kind of paint a pretty accurate depiction from not only his experience, but what we've been perceiving about this coaching staff and the experience for these players in the locker room. Was asked what they would want in a new head coach, not necessarily seen or appreciated from the athletic director. Then you get this guy in here who says one thing and then acts another way. It's a lot to digest, Jordan. It really is, because it's a pretty deep and dense situation from all those testimonies.
Yeah, it really is, right? And again, yeah, some of those things are a little more frivolous. Some things are quite deep and indicative of, if true, some much deeper issues, right? When it comes to relating to players, when it comes to trust of players, when it comes to providing them the help that they need in certain situations. And I think at the end of the day, it is just absolutely imperative that those things, every stone is turned over. Every person is interviewed. Like, you got to dig deep, right? Those are deep level accusations that absolutely need to be investigated. And we'll get into a little bit later, but yeah, a lot of those comments were addressed, and we will talk a bit about that from the athletic administration. But that absolutely has to be, and you can understand when you get that kind of testimony why the senators felt compelled to have this hearing, why a lot of people are saying, hey, maybe the Board of Regents is more the appropriate body to go ahead and talk about this, whether it's, bringing in an independent investigator to, I think, as a possible idea, which I think isn't a bad one, because look, at the very least, they can come in with an unbiased, a third party sort of look at it, right? Even if David Matlin did his due diligence, even if David Lassner did his due diligence, did everything that they could in their power, it might just help, right, to have somebody from outside of the university come in and really find out whether or not, hey, what's what is what they were told as well, right? Because they can only work off of what they were told. So yeah, it shows why there is the level of concern from a lot of people inside, outside, adjacent to the program when it comes to this. All right, we are long overdue for our halftime break. We will try and get to as much of the second half of this hearing when we come back. But we got to tell you about our good friends over at Xanthicin, the only brand that delivers 3 times more astaxanthin than the competition. You might need it because it helps with anti-aging qualities. And if you're sitting through some of these Senate hearings, you might need some of the astaxanthin, even recommended by doctors and pharmacists for its joint and muscle function, with your cholesterol and cognitive health as well. Available at getxantho.com. You can also find it at Newtown Square Pharmacy, Down to Earth Kaka'ako, and Pharmacare Hawaii as well. Again, check out getxantho.com. That's getxantho.com to learn more.
This is Hawaii Football Now from ESPN Honolulu.
All right, second half time, more of the Senate hearing discussion. Jordan and Hunter back with you. An action plan put forward by the University of Hawaii. How will this success be measured? Before we get to that, we mentioned that David Lassner talked about the oral testimony being cherry-picked, called the process unbelievable. Said there was substantial testimony in support of the athletic director and coach that wasn't allowed at the hearing. I took the time, I went through all 86 pages of written testimony. Not all of the testimony related to football. There were some issues brought up regarding men's basketball, regarding women's basketball as well. But the vast majority had to do with the football program or just the athletic department as a whole. And I'd say it was probably roughly 50-50. I didn't tally, one in support, one against. There were a number of emails that, flat out just said the senators should keep their nose out of this business, should put their money where their mouth is, support the program a little bit more. There was testimony that came in that absolutely ripped Todd Graham and the program. There was also testimony that came in, as President Lassner pointed out, very much in support. And so, some of those guys put their name to it as well. Kobe Burton, senior defensive back from Houston, McNeese State transfer, wrote in and he said, I've grown tremendously in my 1-year tenure at Hawaii University of Hawaii, spiritually, mentally, and also physically. Coach Graham has played a major role in my development on and off the field as a football player, as a man. I firmly believe Hawaii football will be a completely different program in 2022, 2023 due to the system in place. Much love to this program and how I became family in less than a year. Nate Adams, freshman offensive lineman from Flower Mound, Texas. Throughout the recruiting process and since I've come to Hawaii, Coach Graham and the state of Hawaii have been nothing but good to me. I can't speak for others, but as far as my own experiences with Coach, he has not lied to me or personally attacked me. That's all I have to say, and I am honored to represent the university and the state of Hawaii each day. Nate Adams' parents also wrote in with strong support for the coaching staff, including Coach Graham, Coach Alik Terry, Coach Sam Bennett, some of the offensive line coaches, along with head coach Graham. Beth Adams, mother of Nate Adams, said in his words, Coach Graham is tough but not abusive. And the things that have been said about him, he has never seen or heard him do, in referencing her son, Nate. We support Coach Graham because our son does, and he is right there with him. Coach Graham has been nothing but helpful and encouraging to our son, Nate Adams, and we want to go on the record that we support him. You had Dayton Tony, second-year freshman wide receiver from Frisco, Texas. Since I came to Hawaii with Coach Graham as my head coach, I have learned an abundance of things, and I will not only use as a student athlete, but as a man for the rest of my life. Coach Graham has taught me lessons that could not be taught nor learned easily nowadays. His intentions have always been pure for the kids that he coaches. Claims of Coach Graham being verbally abusive are absurd and not true. A coach's job is to train his players into being successful not only on the field, but also off the field, to shape us into real men. Coach Graham's word usage is nothing out of the ordinary as any level of being a coach, and only shows his true passion for what he does. You had Jake Farrell, the second-year freshman quarterback from Scottsdale, Arizona. Ever since I came here, he has always showed me his full support and have learned so much from Coach Graham over the past few years. Coach Graham doesn't only prepare you for football season, he is preparing us to be husbands and fathers. He only wants us to be the best. He only wants the best from us in life. And a lot of the hate he is getting is simply not true. He is a tough leader, but that is needed in order to succeed on the field and in life. This whole situation has been blown out of proportion. I have learned so much from Coach Graham and looking forward to the rest of my years here with him at Hawaii. I truly believe if anyone can lead us to a championship, it is him. There is no one else I would rather have as my head coach. Jake Farrell's parents also wrote emails in support of Coach Graham. You have Riley Wilson, a second-year freshman linebacker from Prosper, Texas, says, I believe that Coach Graham is a man of God and he loves all of his players, and that the way he coaches is pursued by a great deep passion for the game of football. In today's society, the culture Coach Graham stands by is something rare and unique, and that's truly why I believe a lot of kids have left the program. I stand by Coach Graham because of the wonderful opportunity he's giving me to play for a great university and school. Just as the Bible says, no man is perfect, and of course, mistakes will be made, but Graham's intentions are for what's best for these players in the university, as well striving to not only set them up for great student athletes, but even better people for when it's time to face the real world. The last player who wrote in was Colby Wyatt, a senior transfer tight end from the University of Georgia. He's originally from San Diego. And to take part of his email, he wrote a pretty lengthy email. So the question remains, if we have so much talent, why does that not show up in championships? And why do all these high caliber players want to leave? He talks about coming to Hawaii and realizing how much talent is out here. The answer to that is complicated. Many people want to blame the athletic director and the coach, and quite frankly, they are not blameless, but they are not the only ones to blame. However, the AD and our coach have admitted to their wrongs and committed to doing better moving forward. That is all that can be asked. Admit your wrongs and do your best to correct them. He also points out, as a team and organization, we cannot continue to try to compete with these other schools without funding. I have spoken to players on this team who say that St. Louis High School has a better meal program than the current UH football team now. I used to play at around 250 pounds. Now I play around 230, and that is not by choice. Meals provided are scarce. While most schools get 3 meals a day, the most we get is 2 a day, and that's only during the season and spring practice. During off-season workouts, we are not fed at all. So he brings up some points that I think, speak to greater issues around the program, which I think are more than fair, and wasn't necessarily an all-out endorsement of Coach Graham, but he talked about, hey, he's admitted he's going to work on it. And, that was something that Colby Wyatt was encouraged to see. You had a couple of former players of Coach Graham's from Tulsa, Moulton Hopkins, who was a defensive lineman at Tulsa, also won the Grey Cup with Ottawa in the CFL. You had the mother of former Tulsa player Roy Roberts also write in. You had assistant coach Kim McLeod, who works with the Corners and is an alum, played at the University of Hawaii. He wrote, I want to specifically address Coach Graham. Yes, he is firm and demands excellence. It is not a toxic environment. He's a hard coach, but he loves his players. Coach Graham asks his coaches to go into the locker room, to be a mentor, to be a liaison between football and their lives off the field. And he wrote, I would like to conclude by saying that it's far more supportive of the team in Hawaii football to see the whole picture and not listen to only the negative voices. Hawaii football is a priority in my life. It's not because I currently work for the University of Hawaii, but as a former player and alum, my deep desire is to see Hawaii football to be the best it can be, with more funding, more support, and more aloha for the team. Charlie Wade also wrote in, the men's volleyball coach. He was the lone other current coach to write in, voice support for David Lassner and David Matlin, but he did not mention the football program in his short email of support. Again, there was negative written testimony. You had the family of former walk-on Kelia Brum, St. Louis grad, basically echoing a lot of the same sentiments that you heard from some of the oral testimony. One of the more troubling accusations came, and I should also point out, a lot of the family members that wrote in, some former players, a lot of those were anonymous. So take that with whatever weight you so choose. But one of the more troubling anonymous emails was from a person claiming to be a former football manager for the University of Hawaii football team from Hilo, alleging severe verbal abuse leading to the use of antidepressants. He eventually quit, said he is now addicted to antidepressants. And again, anonymous. So I, kind of take that for what you will. And so because we're sort of short on time here, we're going to kind of have to bridge that. And I think next week we can really get into the meat and potatoes of this hearing, I think, which is the discussion between the senators, between the athletic director, between the president, and I think to some people's surprise, Coach Todd Graham, who makes an appearance later in this hearing. And they get into some of the more tangible things that they are doing to move forward, some of the more pressing and I think pointed questions from the senators as well, in reference to a lot of these accusations, in reference to some of the struggles going on within the program. And I think to try and rush through this in about 5 minutes is not going to really do it justice. And maybe this is an awkward stopping off point, but it's just sort of where we're at time-wise, Hunter. But if you have any thoughts regarding some of the written testimony in support of Coach Graham, feel free, or we can even save some of those comments for next week's episode as well. But again, we got a whole lot more that we want to get into, and we want to do it justice by spending the appropriate amount of time on all of this. Plus, we still got to talk about Georgia, Alabama in our overtime segment before we get out of here. But Hunter, any sort of concluding thoughts on where we're at in this long breakdown of what transpired last week, Friday?
Yeah, with us beginning a new year, this is week 2 into 2022. I would encourage our listeners, our fan base out there that is still listening, to think on the positive side. Some things regarding the revenue generated from the team. Not all of that is particularly the athletic director or our head coach's fault. I mean, we had so much going on this year, last year, with regards to COVID, that it made it very, very difficult to run this program. And I'm sure from Matlin's perspective, all of athletics as a whole, with all of these new challenges literally on a daily basis. So there's a lot of things going on right here. Focus on staying safe, focus on staying healthy, put one foot in front of the other. I think that this athletic department and definitely this coaching staff is looking ahead to 2022 of, okay, there's some things we can improve on, but at least we are still here and we are still kicking. So that'd be a thought that I have bridging into next week, Jordan. I'm eager to hear everything else as well.
Yeah, because I think what we get into next week, and I got like 4 pages of notes remaining in off of this hearing. Next week, when we get into that stuff, that really is sort of the direction that the UH administration, I think, is trying to point things in. Whether people want to follow that's a whole nother story. But I think that is well said by you, because I will just close in saying that we haven't gotten to it yet, but it is clear that the athletic administration, the university administration, like they're moving forward with Todd Graham. That is the direction that this program is heading, for better or worse. That was clear coming out of things, even though you've got petitions put out there for the removal of the program. You got GoFundMe's for the buyout and all things like that. As of last week, Friday, that is the direction of the program. And who knows, maybe things will change by the time we record next week's episode, but there is a whole lot more to get into. All right, Hunter, we'll put that on the pause. We will revisit things in a week's time. But for our overtime segment, we got to talk about, right, the national championship game. And boy, it's kind of hard to imagine that the University of Hawaii exists in the same division of athletics that Georgia and Alabama do, because it's not the same, not even close. Those teams are just loaded. I think Mel Kiper said there's like 20 guys that are on those rosters that'll get drafted this year. That doesn't even include like Bryce Young and Will Anderson, like guys that aren't even draft eligible. Was kind of ho-hum for 3 quarters, like a lot of defensive struggle. If you're a fan of defense, great. I'm an offensive guy. I'd like to see a few more points. And then that 4th quarter was bananas. Give the credit to Georgia. Awesome performance.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I felt kind of like the Georgia Bulldog. They flashed over to him a couple of times and he was asleep in his cage. Definitely the first 3 quarters of that game. But then, man, when it got down to the nitty gritty and the light was at the end of the tunnel for the end of that game, it seemed like everybody turned into, another gear and it became a bloodbath. And, it was so exciting. So many storylines between the coaches, obviously working together for all those years. But my personal favorite, I'm a sucker for a 5'10", skinny quarterback out there with a lot of heart, because I might just be one of those people. I thought Stetson Bennett played his heart out, came back after a questionable fumble that was in a dicey part of the game. So much respect for that young man. Love that kid's story. And I like a team that plays together like a family. And you could just tell watching Georgia, they love each other. There's a unity, there's a brotherhood, a bond out there, and they played inspiring football. And it's always fun to see the king get dethroned. Bama's been there for way too long. Georgia was due. We've been talking about that for a while. So I was stoked, man.
Yeah, it's movie script type stuff, Stetson. The dude's name is Stetson Bennett the Fourth.
Yeah.
He walked on. I think the stat was he's the first walk-on to beat Nick Saban, or at least former walk-on, right?
I love
at
it.
quarterback since Brian
That's
Griese.
awesome.
Since Brian Griese did it at Michigan when Saban was at Michigan State, like 25 years ago. That's incredible. Just absolutely incredible. Awesome stuff. It was a lot of fun. No more college football for a while. And for the University of Hawaii, well, it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving for us, talking heads and gas bags that get to keep discussing. So we got a whole lot more to talk about next week. Again, a big mahalo to our sponsors, Xanthison and Spectrum Mobile. Hunter, always fun to kind of debrief with you. Anytime some of this news comes across, I'm like, man, I can't wait to talk story with Hunter and kind of parse things through. But we're far from over when it comes to recapping this Senate hearing. So we hope you all join us next week as well for episode 21. We're almost up at 21 of legal age when it comes to episodes
exactly right.
For Hawaii Football Now. Again, be sure to follow us, hit us up on Twitter at Jordan Helle. You can follow Hunter at All Around ATH. Drop us a line on the YouTube, the Facebook, the Twitter, whatever it is. Try and stay out of the mud. We appreciate everybody for tuning in. We will see you next week on Hawaii Football Now. Aloha, everybody.
You've been listening to Hawaii Football Now with Jordan Helle and Hunter Hughes, all from ESPN Honolulu.